Welcome back to Kitplanes Firewall Forward. I'm Paul Dye and I'm here today to talk about spark plug maintenance. This is one method that works. Your typical Lycoming engine is going to have 8 spark plugs, and if they're using a magneto system, they're going to be using massive electrode plugs like what we have here. We've taken these out of the Sportsman. We're going to take a look at them and tell you today about the things you need to look for to make sure that your spark plugs are in good health. First thing, let me re-emphasize, we talked about this a while back. If you drop an aviation spark plug, the old saying says if you drop it once, drop it a second time in the trash, because there is an insulator deep inside here which can crack if this is dropped on a concrete floor, and it will break and you can't tell that it's happened. So unfortunately, if you drop one of these expensive plugs, it is going to be trash. So be very, very careful with them. Work on a workbench. Don't just hang around the engine bay and take the risk of dropping them. So we've got these plugs out. We've carefully removed them. We're going to do a little bit of inspecting. First thing you want to do is take a look at the threads, make sure they're in good shape. If they've got some gunk on them because somebody used too much anti-seize, you can clean that up with a wire wheel. It's not uncommon on some older spark plugs to see a little rust on the outside. It's a good idea to take that off with some Scotch-Brite if you can do that. And then make sure that the threads here for the cap are in good shape as well. The massive electrode end, we have a big center electrode which is round, and we have the 2 side electrodes. You want to make sure that that center electrode is still round. As this plug wears, it is going to wear into a football or oval shape. That's going to enlarge the gap as well. If the ellipse is squished to the point where it's half as wide as it is long, then it's worn out. You're done. You have to throw that plug away. Up until that point, you can always adjust the gap. So the gap is checked with a wire gauge. You want to pull out your 018 or 18,000th little plug and then run it through there. The reason we don't use a flat feeler gauge is because if you look very closely, this gap is actually circular and a flat gauge won't give you a good reading. So the spec is 016 to 021 in most cases, and so you can go ahead if it's a little bit loose with your 018, try it with an 022. This one won't fit through there, and so the gap is still fine on this plug. The other thing to do is make sure you look down deep inside, get a bright light, look for any kind of lead buildup. It's not uncommon to see little balls of lead, and you can sometimes get after those with a dental pick. Very, very carefully probe, but remember you've got a porcelain insulator in there, and so you've got to be a little careful not to damage it. If you do any sideways prying, you'll crack that insulator and this plug goes in the trash. So if you have to adjust the gap, you need a little tool. It looks just like this. It screws on, and you've got these 2 little T-handles, one for either side, one for each of the massive electrodes. So you want to line that up so that you can push on the electrodes with those little the little screw T-handles. And then all it's a matter of checking the gap, and it's probably going to be wider than what you want because the electrodes wear. That opens up the gap. And then you want to just screw in the T-handle just a little bit to tighten that gap up. What you don't want to do is to have to open the gap manually, pry that back out, because if you're going to do that, you're probably going to break the insulator in the middle, and it's a trashed plug. So always work in the direction of closing the gap up, put a little bit in, check it with your gauge, screw a little bit more if you need to, and then do both sides, and you should have a nicely gapped spark plug. A couple other things we can do with them. You can clean up the plug with one of these. It's a portable sandblaster. It'll have the media in there. There's not much to show you except that you put the plug in the end, and then you'll put some air in there, rock it around, blast it all, pull it back out, and it'll look a lot cleaner. Make sure you then take just air, put an air nozzle, put it on the end of your hose, and clean that out some more. Take a look at your washer. It's a good idea to have a box of these around because you really shouldn't reuse these. These crush when you put them in. The last thing you might want to check with your plugs is to check the resistance, because if the resistance breaks down, the plug is on its way to being worn out. So you can get a an aviation plug resistance tester. This one's from Tempest. You put that on, you turn it on, get a good contact here, and check it. We should get a green light. You might have to rotate the plug a little bit like we did. Get a green light and it's a good resistance. So that plug is still good. So we can check all these plugs in this line this way. Now, I'm looking at a couple of these. The lower plugs here on this engine is recently breaking in. We have a couple of plugs which are just a little bit darker than the others. You want to look for a nice tan color. You don't want to see much buildup. These have just a little bit more stuff on the bottom, which is to be expected from an engine that was just breaking in. But overall, these plugs look like they're in really good shape. So we're going to go ahead and just put them back in. When you're putting plugs in, you're going to need a couple things. You need a good spark plug socket, an aviation spark plug socket. It's a 7/8. You'll want a torque wrench. We have this set to 32 foot-pounds, which is the right torque for these kind of plugs. And then you're going to want some anti-seize. The good black anti-seize from Tempest. You don't want to use too much. You just need a little bit. So we're going to take our plug, and I'll show you that here before we go over and put them in the engine. We're just going to take a little bit of anti-seize and put just a little bit on 2 threads. Very thin coating, and that plug is ready to go back in. Let's go over to the engine and put some plugs in. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put a couple spark plugs in. We're going to put them back in these in the holes that they came out of because they're in really good shape. Rotating spark plugs is something you can decide with your do some research on. It's not a bad idea. In this case, these plugs haven't been in very long, so we're going to put them back in their same spot. So this is the top of number 2. We've got a new washer. We kind of capture that so it doesn't fall out and fall down into the spaces between the fins. And you want to make sure when you start a plug, you get it really nice and straight and that it smooths, goes in nice and smooth like this. If there's any cross-threading at all, stop, take it out. As a matter of fact, if you've tried to put a plug into a hole several times and it just doesn't want to start, there's a little tool. It's a thread chaser. It's something that's basically like a tap. It's not a bad idea to have, especially with an older engine. And you can take and put that in, line it up, and you can start to screw it in. And what it'll do is not cut new threads. You don't want to cut new threads. But what it'll do is it'll clean out any kind of gunk that might have built up in there. And so this one's in great shape. I don't really have to worry about it because it's an almost new engine. But that's a handy tool to have in your toolbox. So here's top number 4. We're going to go ahead and put, and you'll notice that I just put that in finger tight for now. I like to get all the plugs started, and then we'll go ahead and torque them in place. So we've got these 2 on this side. Before we switch to the other side, we'll go ahead and do this. So we've set our torque wrench for 32 foot-pounds. Get it nice and seated. We're not damaging any of the baffles. We'll go ahead and pull that until we get a good click. And I always like to do 3 pulls on a torque wrench without releasing the tension in between. Sometimes you can have a difficult time getting the plug wrench on with this rear, and we're going to have to come back on that with a crow's foot in order to torque this because you don't have enough room to get this to click in place. So we'll come back and we'll put a crow's foot on here and make the adjustment to torque that. So we'll go over to the other side and we'll do the same thing. Once we've torqued the spark plug in place, we need to attach the lead. Make sure that you've got to just do a quick visual inspection. Cigarette should be in good shape. Spring should be in good shape. The cap should go down over that. So line it up nice. Put it in place. Don't let anything get cross-threaded. It should spin on nice and smooth. And then we're going to tighten that by holding the center with a 7/16 inch wrench and using a 3/4 on the outside to snug that down. When you tighten this up, you want to make sure that you're not twisting the center lead. So you want to hold that with a 7/16, put the 3/4 on the outside, and just give that a nice snug without letting that center rotate at all. And then you go and repeat that on the other plugs. That's really all there is to the basics of spark plug maintenance. Thanks for watching. Thanks to Tempest for sponsoring the series. Come watch us next time on Kitplanes Firewall Forward. Omar, second camera. I'm making outtakes here.
He's destroying his thing. He just turns the gas. You know, you're supposed to let the fan run for a minute, right? Otherwise, you burn the thing up.
Harbor Freight, it comes 3 days.
Then don't worry about it.